Before the flood, before the kingdoms, before written history could contain what happened, there were giants. Not metaphors, not myths, giants. Beings so massive, so otherworldly, that the ancient world could not explain them without invoking the heavens themselves. And for thousands of years, their story has been buried, suppressed, quietly removed from the texts that most people read every Sunday morning.
What you're about to hear isn't a fairy tale. It's what the oldest surviving manuscripts, hidden from public canon, locked in desert caves and monastery vaults, actually say happened. And once you understand it, the entire story of humanity looks different.
It begins not on earth. It begins above it. In the book of Genesis, there's a passage so strange, so theologically uncomfortable, that most churches read past it as quickly as possible. Genesis 6:2. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took as wives any they chose. Sons of God taking human women. The Hebrew term used here is B'nai Elohim, a phrase used elsewhere in Scripture exclusively to describe angelic or divine beings. Not men, not kings, not metaphors for godly lineage. Beings from a higher order of creation.
But Genesis only gives you the surface. The Book of Enoch, one of the oldest Jewish texts in existence, quoted directly in the New Testament, revered by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church as canonical scripture, goes further, much further. Enoch names them, 200 of them, divine watchers assigned to observe and protect humanity, who looked down from their station above Mount Hermon and made a decision that would fracture the order of creation itself.
They descended. They chose. They crossed a line that was never meant to be crossed. Their leader was named Semyaza, and before they acted, he made every single one of them take an oath, binding them all together in the transgression, because even they knew what they were doing was forbidden. That detail matters. An oath of guilt, shared sin, 200 celestial beings who knew the law and broke it anyway.
What followed their union with human women was something the ancient world had no category for: the Nephilim. The word itself in Hebrew, Nephilim, is derived from the root naphal, meaning to fall, or those who have fallen. Some scholars translate it as the fallen ones, others as those who cause others to fall. Both translations carry a weight that the English word giants simply cannot, because these weren't just large men. According to Enoch, they were enormous. Some traditions record heights that defy modern comprehension. And they were hungry, consuming everything around them: livestock, resources, eventually, according to the text, consuming men. And then consuming each other. The earth couldn't sustain them. The ancient world watched in horror as these hybrid beings, part divine, part human, wholly neither, began to devour the civilization they had been born into. Enoch describes the cries of humanity rising up to heaven itself, the earth weeping, the angels who had remained faithful watching in desperation.
But here's the detail that most people miss entirely. The Watchers didn't just bring offspring. They brought knowledge. Enoch lists it: specific forbidden knowledge transferred to humanity by specific Watchers. Azazel taught men to make weapons of war: swords, shields, breastplates. and taught women the art of seduction through cosmetics and adornment. Another taught sorcery, another the cutting of roots, another astrology and the reading of celestial signs. Skills that seem almost mundane now.
But in that era, in that world, that knowledge was an accelerant. It supercharged human capacity for violence, vanity, and power. It disrupted a developmental timeline that was never meant to be fast-tracked. Civilization didn't just grow. It was seeded with something it wasn't ready for.
Now here's where the story takes a turn that should make you deeply uncomfortable. The Book of Enoch existed. It was widely read. It was respected. The Apostle Jude quotes it almost verbatim in the New Testament. And yet, somewhere around the 4th century, it was quietly removed from the canon that most of the Western world would inherit. Why? The theological implications are staggering. If divine beings could rebel, descend, and corrupt physical creation, what does that say about the vulnerability of the created order? What does it say about free will at a cosmic level? What does it say about the nature of the flood itself? Because that's the part the sanitized version never tells you. The flood wasn't just judgment for human wickedness. In Enoch's account, it was a targeted response. The Nephilim had to be removed. The Watchers had to be bound. God sends the archangel Raphael to bind Azazel hand and foot in a pit of sharp and jagged stones in the desert, a place called Dudael, to await final judgment. Michael is sent to bind Semyaza and the others, suspended between heaven and earth until the day of judgment. Imprisoned. Not destroyed, imprisoned. And the Nephilim themselves? They couldn't simply be killed. The text says something remarkable about their fate. Their bodies perished in the flood, but their spirits, the hybrid spiritual nature they carried, half divine lineage, half earthly flesh, had nowhere to go. No heaven, no underworld designed for them. They became something else entirely. The ancient texts call them evil spirits, bound to the earth, wandering, inhabiting, influencing, roaming without rest because creation had no place designed to receive what they were. If that sounds familiar to any concept you've encountered elsewhere in religious tradition, it should.
Here's what most people assume. The flood ended it. Clean slate. Fresh start. But the text doesn't say that. Numbers 13. The Israelite spies return from Canaan and report something that stops the entire nation of Israel in its tracks. They say, and this is in the canonical Bible, "We saw the Nephilim there, and we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes."
After the flood, Deuteronomy mentions the Rephaim, a race of giants inhabiting the land of Canaan. Joshua encounters them. The kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, whose iron bed was recorded as being over 13 feet long, preserved as evidence, a monument to something that couldn't be easily explained. And then there's Goliath.
Most people know the story. Few know that Goliath had brothers. 1 Chronicles 20 lists them. Multiple giant warriors from Gath, each described as extraordinary in size and strength. One had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. These weren't isolated anomalies in the text. They were remnants.
The question scholars have wrestled with is whether the Nephilim bloodline survived the flood through Noah's lineage, possibly through the wives, or whether a second incursion of the Watchers occurred. Genesis 6 uses a phrase that has haunted translators for centuries. And also afterward. Also afterward. Two words that quietly destroy the assumption that the flood was a complete erasure. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave near the Dead Sea and heard something shatter. What he discovered, what was pulled from those caves over the following years, included fragments of the Book of Enoch. Fragments that matched the Ethiopian manuscripts that had been preserved for centuries by a church most of the Western world had never heard of. The text had survived, hidden in clay jars, waiting.
The Dead Sea Scrolls revealed that the Enochian tradition wasn't fringe. It wasn't apocryphal in the dismissive sense we use today. It was central to the worldview of the community at Qumran, and almost certainly to the broader Jewish understanding of their own history in the centuries around the life of Jesus.
This wasn't mythology being preserved. This was history being preserved. Which raises the question that I'll leave with you, because I don't think it has a comfortable answer. If this material was known, widely read, theologically serious, why was it removed? Who benefited from a version of the Genesis story that stripped out the Watchers, the forbidden knowledge, the post-flood giants, the imprisoned cosmic beings? A simplified story is an easier story to control. There's something the ancient writers understood that we have almost completely lost. The world they described wasn't a world of simple moral fables. It wasn't a world of metaphor dressed up as history. It was a world where the boundary between the physical and the divine was genuinely permeable, where cosmic decisions had material consequences, where beings from another order of existence could interfere catastrophically with the human story.
They didn't consider that primitive. They considered it terrifying and true. If you take the Enochian tradition seriously, and serious scholars across Jewish, Christian, and academic traditions increasingly do, then the Nephilim aren't a curiosity in the margins of Scripture.
They are an explanation for why civilization accelerated so violently, why warfare was encoded into the human story from its earliest chapters, why the flood came not as punishment for ordinary human failure, but as surgical intervention against something that was never supposed to exist. And why, even after the waters receded, something remained.
If these ancient texts have stayed with you, if you find yourself wanting to go deeper into what was hidden, what was removed, and why, the Book of Enoch is available to read in full. The Ethiopian canon, the Dead Sea Scrolls fragments, they're not secret anymore. They were just never handed to you. Read them yourself. The oldest accounts of humanity's most defining crisis are still out there, waiting. The question is whether the story you've been told is the whole one.